This is part 5 of this Stihl rebuild. As you can see, we've got the cylinder on now, so I propose to put the flywheel on and see how far we go. I'm going to try zooming in this time, so let's see what happens. Okay, so on the, and I can't turn this up, yes I can. On this shaft, on the flywheel side, there's a taper and then the threads. And because we've left the nut on there and kept it flush with the top of the threads, when we used a drift to loosen the flywheel, we've not damaged those threads at all. Just one thing I want to pick up on here is, if you don't use starter cord or a piston stop in the plug hole to lock the crank, and you put something in this flywheel, then that's what happens. Look, you see, this is off an old saw. You've got a broken fin, and of course that will now be out of balance, so the saw will vibrate. It'll still work, but the saw will vibrate a bit. So, you know, chainsaws are bad enough as it is, although the modern ones with their spring AVs and whatnot are somewhat better. So that's that. The next thing is, on this taper, there's a little key. Here we go. Let's just have a look at this. There's a little keyway. And in that keyway goes this dinky little key, half moon key. It's called a Woodruff key, and the curved bit goes in the slot. So once that's tapped in place, then we get the flywheel and go and sort of roughly line up the keyway and just pop it on. Then there's a nut. You've got to remember to tighten this nut up well, because if it's one of those ones where you just go, oh, I'll tighten that up later, then what will happen is you'll forget, and then the flywheel will come loose and ruin not only the flywheel, but it will also ruin the crankshaft. So let's just poke a bit of starter cord in there. Right, we want to know where the piston is. It's going down, and the exhaust port is now closed. So we can pop this starter cord in, knowing that it's not going to go straight out the exhaust port. Right, that's the starter cord in there, and that's locked. That do. Okay, and of course the starter cord is still in a loop, so we know we've taken it all out. Next thing, we've talked about this already, but we'll do it again. We have the ignition coil. One of the bolts, the top bolt, also provides the earth. I'm just making sure the magnets are over here, so it doesn't pull the coil in towards the flywheel. Useful to have all this cleaned off. Just get that wound down and then wind it back. Okay, this is a very thin bit of cardboard which will do quite nicely. Put that there. Where are the magnets? The magnets will be there. And just slacken these off a bit, and that should pull. The magnet should pull the coil in. to them, and then just tighten it up. Interesting on the early Huskies, 254s and stuff like that, when the coils get a bit weak, you can get them running again by closing that gap. I don't like that because that earth strap there is fouling the flywheel. Right, you don't want these to touch at all, because if you do, then it will create heat and it will burn the coil out and all sorts of nasties. Hence, you've got to have the right gap. But as I say, on some of the Huskies where the coils get a bit weak, you can close the gap up a bit and get them to work. Right, I'm happy with that. Then what you've got here is this lot goes in that notch, and there's various ways that the cables find their way through to the plug, and these two go down in there. And these go, one's the earth, which fits in the bottom there, and the other one is the moving contact, which moves with the stop lever. Fits in there, so it just pops in there. And because there's that piece of brass exposed there, it comes in contact with this spring here and shorts out. That'll do for the moment until we get on with the carburetor. So it's time to put the exhaust on, and what we have is the main body there with these two bolt holes in there, then the cover with two bolt holes that go through those two bolts, and the exhaust gasket. This can be quite fiddly as usual, and it's easier to put this on when the top handle's off and when the chain brake's off. But of course, normally in normal repairs you'd be doing it with all those things in the way. I just put a bit of sealant on there, not to seal it, but just to glue that gasket on there. This goes this way, like that, and the bolts are quite short, and they're normally the black ones because they've been in the exhaust. Put a bolt through, and then offer it up. Have that going. Should do. Yep, there it goes. And offer the other one up. There we go. Before you tighten these up, it's quite useful to just put one of these in place, or even both of them, because you've got movement in these holes, you can end up tightening these bolts up in here and then putting the cover on and then realising the bolt holes don't line up. So what we're doing is we're tightening that up with those located. Now these need to be reasonably tight because of vibration. If you're running a saw and it's got a slight rattling sound from the exhaust, then there's a good chance that one or both of those bolts have come loose. And I've had it where one's been dead tight and the other one's come loose, and it's been actually rattling around in the bottom there. Doesn't take a minute to fix the problem. Running them loose like that can eventually damage the threads in the pot. Which isn't a good thing. So there we go. In some countries where they have things called spark arresters, there's a fine gauze over the output. Check that, because they can block up, and then your saw will run but not rev. I've had one before. I just took the screen out, chucked it away. The next thing to do beyond that will be to start putting the oil pump on, the new oil pump feed, and then start to rebuild the chain brake.